Hey, what's up guys, it's Nick2. If you don't already know me, I am a warrior that raids and intern made this boss, which is a 10 out of 10 US top 10 guild, if anybody really cares about that metric. Today I'm here to answer the question for you guys, whether or not you should be playing Fury or Arms, which is better in which scenario, is one just flat out better than the others, etc. Before I get into the video, I would like to mention that I do offer coaching. This pretty much pertains to anything that you may need help with, but most people want to know about like how to, properly do their rotation, stuff like that. And I will be making Fury Warrior guides and Arms Warrior guides in the next upcoming days and stuff. But if you want some personalized coaching, help with anything from UI, weak auras, rotation, little nuanced min-maxy things that you can do, help with certain bosses and Mythic, anything like that, please feel free to email me at nick2biz@gmail.com, and I'm going to start doing a ton of coaching here in the future, so definitely look out for that if you're interested. But regardless of that, let's just get right into the video. So the reason that this is even a point of contention, or that there's even a question of whether or not you play Arms or Fury, is because recently, I think it was almost 2 weeks ago, Fury got what is more or less a 5% buff-ish. So basically the changes that were made, actually I'll just pull it up here. The changes that were made is that they increased all damaging abilities by 8% except for Bladestorm and Dragonroar, and they also nerfed the Meat Cleaver talent, but nobody uses that, so we don't care about that. The main goal of this buff was to increase Fury's single target because it was drastically behind Arms and the single target was really bad, while keeping the AoE relatively in line. However, this buff does directly relate to more AoE damage, but they didn't want to touch Bladestorm, because if you were to buff Bladestorm by another 8%, like Fury was already ahead in AoE, so they didn't want to make it even more ahead, which was the main goal of that buff, was to pretty much just put the single target in line with Arms. Since that buff, it's been about 2 weeks. People are slowly shifting over to play Fury. You see more people playing Fury, and that's the reason that there's even a question in your head of should I actually be playing Fury or Arms, is only because of that buff. Before then, Fury was just flat out worse in single target. In AoE, you could justify playing Fury, but in single target, it was just straight up worse. Now that's a little bit different, and we start to see a lot of people starting to play Fury in raid. I'll talk more about this in a bit when I start talking about raiding, but first, let's just get dungeons out of the way, because that's a really easy thing to talk about. If you just want the answer, Fury is just flat out better in dungeons, but here is the reason why. So let me pull up this good site, Mythic Plus Subcreation. By the way, all of these links will be in the description. So what this site does is basically compiles information based off of contemporary runs. So 21,000 runs in, I believe the last 2 or 3 weeks it is usually. You can check, they have information here. I'm not going to go over all of that, but as you can see here, they do tier lists. These tier lists are solely based on data. There's no, bias or any opinions involved in this. This is solely based on information, and you can see the aggregate data here. As you can see, there are way more runs done by Fury Warriors than there are by Arms Warriors. If we actually look at the information itself, there's 163 Fury Warrior dungeons done at like a 22 and above range, while there's only 51 Arms Warrior runs done at plus 20. I believe that is how this information correlates. And then there's like these weird numbers attributed to them. I don't entirely know what that means, but basically from this you can determine on its own that Arms is just flat out better because more people are playing it. But another way to cross-reference this information is if we were to go on Raider.io, we can go to Warrior, and then we can say, okay, what's the highest Raider.io Arms Warrior? We can assume that the better players, the higher IO players, are going to be playing the better spec. So as we can see, there's one Arms Warrior here at 1976 score. Okay, that's pretty good. And then a few others at 1800. Now let's see what's the highest Fury Warrior. Oh, 2200, 2100, 22,000. 22, 27. Another thing to keep in mind is that these changes only happened 2 weeks ago. So as there's more and more push weeks, as more and more people start making the transition over to Fury, this number is going to be even more skewed, especially because more people are just going to be swapping to it and getting more accustomed to playing Fury. Fury, I believe, was better regardless of the buff, but now with the buff, it's made it to where Fury is unquestionably better in AoE. And once you get these longer, higher keys, Fury is just going to outscale Arms even more, especially when you get more gear. Another way to cross-reference this, if you didn't trust us already, we all know Fire Mage is the spec that mages play. So one way we could check this is be like, okay, all the mages are 2,500, 2,300, all the highest Frost mage or Fire Mages, and then we take a look at Frost. Whew, That's easily a good way to tell that, you know, that this information is trustable. Or I don't know, this is a good way to cross-reference it, I guess that I should say. Now, another thing that I would try to look at, or we'll talk about raid in a second, but this pretty much undeniably determines that Fury is the premier spec in Mythic Plus. Do not play Arms in Mythic Plus. You're trolling if you do. That's the end of it. Where things start getting a little bit more complicated is with raid. I'm not really going to talk about other content like Torghast, World Quest, stuff like that. That is kind of optional, and Torghast entirely depends on anima powers. To be honest, I think Arms has a few broken anima powers where, like, if you get the condemn thing where you can condemn all the time, Arms is, I think, better because you can get flat extra condemn damage and rage gen, and then your condemns can start hitting for 100k per. And you can also get an anima power where you have 100% uptime on Die by the Sword, and that's a little bit better than in Rage regen, but that's Torghast. Who really cares? All we care about here is Mythic Plus and Raid, and PvP, I guess, but in PvP, you know, you play Arms. That's not even a question. I'm not really going to talk about PvP because straight up you just play Arms. But let's take a look at Raid now. So what I would do is I would look at the top logs for the Mythic bosses. If you're only a Heroic Raider, you could look at Heroic bosses as well, but we're just going to be taking a look at Mythic because that's indicative of what the best players are doing and what they're playing on each fight. So I would look at this on a fight-by-fight basis. As you can see scrolling down here, okay, on Shriekwing you got about 9 Arms Warriors and you got 1 Fury Warrior creeping up here. Huntsman, same deal. Hungering Destroyer, same deal. And then on Sun King, in AoE fight, you can see almost everybody's playing Fury. And then we go on Zymaz, same deal. Minerva, same deal. Mostly Arms Warriors. And then Council, you can see a lot of people are playing Fury. Again, that's a fight where there's a good amount of ads, so that's the reason why. Sludge Fist, same deal. Stone Legion Generals, there's a lot of ads in AoE. Sired Athreus, Arms. What you can gather from this information is that Arms is typically the go-to spec in a pure single target scenario, but Fury is going to outshine it in AoE fights such as Sun King, such as Council of Blood, such as Stone Legion Generals. One thing that's interesting about the single target determination, however, if you start to look at more logs, you can see that if Fury is capable of doing as much as Arms is, then it's more of a toss-up whether or not Arms is actually better. Another reason for this is because since those buffs just happened, a lot of people, like myself even, like I re-cleared as Arms, a lot of people are hesitant to swap to Fury. But as you can see, these Fury Warriors are able to put up numbers similar to Arms. So one thing that I would do is sim yourself. So what I did is this is what I sim as Fury. If I only have a 207 weapon as my offhand. But if I made the Deathmaker legendary in single target, this is another thing that you need to keep in mind, is that these warriors in pure single target situations, this is an Athreus, sorry. This guy's playing Deathmaker, Khalid Deathmaker, another Fury Warrior Deathmaker, so you'd probably have to make another legendary in pure single target anyway for it to keep up with Arms. If I were to have a 235 Deathmaker on, you can see that my single target sim for Fury is higher than my Arms is, and my Fury gear isn't well optimized. I don't have very much haste, whereas my gear for Arms is much more optimized for Arms. Another thing that's interesting looking at this is that these people aren't yet able to craft the Deathmaker legendary at 235, and they probably already have a Signet of Tormented Kings at 235. So once they're able to get the Deathmaker legendary up to 235, as you can see his eye level's only 219 because I'm assuming he's wearing like 210 Deathmaker legs. Once he's able to get that to 235, Fury's probably going to sim even higher for them. And also Fury scales better with gear. You get more haste, Fury's better. Whereas Arms, their stats don't really inflate nearly as much. But Fury, you just want haste, 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 haste. And the more gear that you get, the higher that it's going to sim in pure single target. This is pretty much the same story for a lot of the fights as you saw earlier. But what I'm implying here, or what I should rather just explicitly say, is that once people start getting more gear, once people start playing Fury, I believe that Fury is going to outshine Arms in pure single target. However, there are certain fights where it is more of a toss-up. One of those fights is Sired Athreus, or even Council of Blood. The one thing about Fury is that the second that there's ads, the people on the top logs are going to be Fury the second that there's ads, just because the way that Bladestorm works and because Fury does flat out more AoE damage. So you're going to see these people on the logs, but does that mean that it's actually better for you? One way to check this is you can just see their ad damage. So as you can see, Saraline, all of his damage, or the majority of his damage, is actually damage done to waiters. And you can make the argument that damage done to waiters isn't all that relevant. Whereas for arms, if we take a look at, if we instead filter this by just boss damage, which is more important on certain fights, I believe arms will just be better. But it's possible Fury's better, actually, based on the fight. But yeah, as you can see, in terms of just damage to bosses, arms is higher because the only reason Fury is even better than these arms warriors on these fights is just because they're padding on the AoE. It's a very similar situation when you look at Sire Denathrius. You see, okay, this guy's playing Fury, he did pretty good, but then you actually look at his damage. This is a P3 damage that I'm looking at here. Let me cancel that out. Reset the zoom here. If you look at his overall damage, 18% of it is done to Echo of Sin. Whereas if you look at this top Arms Warrior log, only 13% of this guy's damage was done to Echo of Sin. So the determination that you can make from this is that the Fury Warrior only did more based on damage padding on ads, basically, with Bladestorm. But an easier way to check this is to just go on Denathrius and then do damage to bosses. And then as you can see, Arms is just doing more damage to bosses than Fury is. But you could also make the assumption that once, like I said earlier, once people start getting more gear, once people start getting more comfortable with Fury, that could end up being the case that Fury is higher over here. So what I would do is if you're watching this video a month in the future, I would take a look at these logs and check the damage to bosses and see if Arms is still consistently doing more damage to bosses, or if Fury is doing more. You could make the decision yourself to just play Fury for everything and make it easy on yourself. Hopefully this video helped. Sorry if it was a little bit confusing to follow. I can understand if it was. The main takeaway was just that what spec you want to play is dependent on the fight. It's dependent on what your guild actually needs, if they need more boss damage or if they need more AoE damage. When it comes to Mythic Plus, straight up just play Fury. Fury's just better. When it comes to raiding, it depends on the fight, and I would check the logs. And I'd also play whatever is most comfortable to you. If you're way more comfortable playing Fury and you're able to make the Deathmaker legendary, and you're just on Shriekwing or you're just on Hungering Destroyer or something, and you'd much rather play Fury, it's not that far behind Arms anymore to where it's that big of a deal. As you can see, even for me, somebody that is geared particularly for Arms, Fury is still simming higher for me. And that's with me having a 207 offhand. That's with me having very low haste. That's all these other things. So, honestly, do whatever you want. I would just play whatever you're more comfortable with. But there is certain bosses where Arms is going to be better than Fury, specifically for boss damage as well. But as you can see on Huntsman Ultimore, a lot of the top logs are Arms, and I believe that it's going to stay that way because there's not very many ads. The only ads in this fight are like the Shades of Barghast, and the only reason a Fury Warrior even exists is because he's completely padding on those. But if you're progressing on this boss, pad AoE is not relevant. What's relevant is boss damage, and Arms is unquestionably better at that in a 2 to 3 target scenario. The second it goes above 3 targets, Fury's better. That's pretty much the main takeaway. Hopefully this all made sense. Sorry if it was a little bit confusing. In the future, I'll try to do better. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully this answered your question. And if you're interested in coaching, please feel free to email me, or you can even add me on Discord. I think I'll edit that earlier in the video. Yeah, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you later. Peace.